right, so we just played Soft Landing, which is an interesting game about. So you have asymmetric nations that produce resources that you use to activate special abilities that cause stress, and you can stress out the panda and other things. And it's interesting because when you score points, you can. It's kind of a prisoner's dilemma situation where scoring points and getting resources causes stress, which makes potentially you or others lose points, and you're trying to make other people lose points in the process. Ben, what'd you think?
Not for me. I don't like how some factions are designed for early game and some are designed for late game,
Yes.
and there's no way to switch between the two. So if you get an early game faction and it just doesn't happen that your faction wins, you're sitting the rest of the game not doing anything.
Yes.
You're just kind of hosed, in my opinion.
So one of the asymmetric bits of the game is, for example, the European Union starts with 7 points, and the Pacific Rim starts with 17 points. So the Pacific Rim starts with a lot more points, and they want the game to end sooner because as the game goes on, the Pacific Rim is going to get a lot more stress. If you look at the difference, all of these things cause stress, whereas the European Union doesn't cause as much stress. So essentially, if the Pacific Rim doesn't cause the game to end early, they have less likely of a chance to lose, which is not uncommon for things like coin games. So, for example, Cuba Libre, where the government starts off strong and gets weaker over time, or even Root, where like the cats start off really strong and they get
you can change.
but it's a similar situation of like, some factions start off strong, some start off weak, and then they change. For example, the Woodland Alliance starts off weak but gets stronger. The cats start off strong and get weaker. But yeah, that is a thing. I think the game was won. The point totals happened so that the people that started with less points but more resources they could get over time did better than the people that had high point totals and had less stuff or got more stress over time. But I feel like that is a thing that is mitigated with experience. I feel like if those factions work together to cause more catastrophes and blame it on other people, that could that, like you said, you can mitigate that with the cats, but I think you can mitigate that in this game as well.
No, it's that in Root or other games, you can change your strategy on the fly, and you can say, oh, I want to change this. And I don't really feel that somebody who has a high victory point total early game can really do that. They're stuck in their strategy. And if they don't win early game and end it for everybody else, then they are stuck on this strategy, and they're just playing through the motions.
All right, Paul? You won the game.
10 out of 10. Love it.
What did you actually think?
That is what I
That's
love
what you think
it.
it's
I would absolutely play this again, and I would recommend it to other people.
Okay. So how'd you win? Because you were doing something that nobody... You were winning by manipulating the market?
So initially, I was actually purchasing my special abilities.
Yeah.
Like, if
And
you're
getting
not
points
doing
from
that,
there. Yeah.
you're losing points early on.
Yeah, so you get... The main way that you get points is you have... cubes here, and every time you use your special ability, you get points equal to the number of cubes there, and whoever is last gets to choose which one of these refills to get more points. So it's a bit of a power grid mechanic where you want to be last because you get the benefit from being... Sorry, you want to be first because you get the benefit of being first, but to be first, you have to have the last in points, which you didn't have, but I guess you were able to manipulate things so that you still got points.
He shared a special ability with me, and so while I was sitting there spamming my special ability, he was also benefiting from it.
Yeah, okay.
Yes, I also shared an ability with you, which you were doing early on as well.
Yeah.
Additionally, market manipulation just allows you to sell stuff at a much higher value.
Yeah.
Being able to sell a single object for 3 tokens is fucking great. Like, there's no way I wouldn't do that every turn if I could. Those are probably the 2 major things I did that other people were not doing.
Yeah, and I got second, which I basically was It was a pretty straightforward thing. I was using my special abilities and trying to use the market to exploit the market to my to my benefit, but I didn't do it as well as Paul did. Kelly, take that. What do you think?
Superstar. I think, especially for people who aren't used to playing like these kind of, because it is kind of an engine building game.
Yeah, a little bit.
And I'm not the biggest fan of those. So I'd have to play it again.
Yeah.
I think, to really.
So you had Eastern Europe, which was one of the countries that had, or one of the regions that had more stress. And we were talking about how you did have like military, so you probably could have used military. I mean, it is a learning game for all of us, but you could have used military to make that to cause more. You could have worked with the Pacific Rim to cause more catastrophes, and then use the military to blame it on other people. But that's something that to consider for next time. But yeah, as far as these games, as far as these games are concerned, not liking these games in general, did you find were you okay with this?
I wouldn't mind playing it again.
Okay. Well, I thought that it was brilliant. I do agree. I do have some issues. I feel like it kind of. I mean, we played about the longest game of this that you can play, right? And I feel like it did kind of overstay its welcome a little bit, just because the narrative arc of it isn't much different. You're pretty much doing the same thing every round. I felt like with 5 players, which we had, there was some downtime. You're kind of. I mean. You're doing these steps over here, and you have to wait until everybody does all of the things. But I feel like it could be a quick game once everyone does everything. So I those are minor things. I feel like it's really tight. It has some really interesting decisions of I can do this, but it's going to cause me problems. Like just the idea that every time you go up in points, you're causing stress. So having to deal with that stress and having to deal with other people's stress. And the really interesting bit of the European it starts. So the European starts. The European Union is in a lot better position, but they really have to clean up the Pacific Rim's mess. Because the European Union wants the game to last as long as possible, so they have to make the stress go down, and they have to be doing a lot of foreign aid to do that. So the European Union is like doing as much effort as possible to remove stress, and Japan was doing the same thing. Like we were both trying to remove stress from the board, which, I mean, thematically it works really well. I really like a lot of the footnotes that the rulebook has. I really like how it simulates kind of like real world events, that you're adding stress to the world, and the more developing nations are you're having to kind of like adapt for that. I don't know. I think for the few bits that it seems fiddly at first, but for as tight and elegant as the game is, it has a lot of elements to it. Maybe a little more simulational at first, but I feel like I don't know. I'm really excited to try this again. So yeah, that's Soft Landing.